Boys and girls, this is Miss Goad. I'll be reading Chapter 6 from our book Frindle by Andrew Clements. The Big Idea. Three things happened later than that same afternoon. Nick and Janet Fisk had missed the bus because of a school newspaper meeting, so they walked home together. They were seeing who could walk along the curb without falling. It took a lot of concentration, and when Janet stepped off the street, Nick said, "That's 3 points for me." But Janet said, "I didn't fall. I saw something. Look." She bent down and picked up a gold ballpoint pen, the fancy kind. That was the first thing, Janet finding the pen. Then they got back to the curb, and Nick followed Janet, putting one foot carefully in front of the other on the narrow concrete curb. And while he stepped along, he thought back over the school day, especially about his report, and what Mrs. Granger had said about words at the end of the period finally sank in. That was the second thing, understanding what Miss Granger had said. She had said, "Who says dog means dog?" "You do, Nicholas." "You do, Nicholas," he repeated to himself. "I do," Nick thought, still putting one foot in front of the other, following Janet. What does that mean? And then Nick remembered something. When he was about 2 years old, his mom had bought him one of those unbreakable cassette players and a bunch of sing-along tapes. He had loved them, and he had played them over and over and over. He would carry the tape and the player to his mother, or his big brother, or his father, and bang them together and say, "Guagla, guagla, guagla," until someone put the cassette in the machine and turned it on. And for 3 years, whenever he said "guagla," his family knew that he wanted to hear those pretty sounds made with voices and instruments. Then, when Nick went to preschool, he learned that if he wanted his teacher and the other kids to understand him, he had to use the word music. But "guagla" meant this nice sound to Nick, because Nick said so. "Who says guagla means music?" "You do, Nicholas." "No fair!" yelled Janet. They were at the corner of their own street, and Nick had bumped into her, completely absorbed in his thoughts. Janet stumbled off the curb, and the gold pen in her hand clattered onto the street. "Sorry, I didn't mean to, honest," said Nick. I just wasn't watching. Here." Nick stooped over and picked up the pen and held it out to her. "Here's your—" And then that's when the third thing happened. Nick didn't say pen. Instead, he said, "Here's your Frindle." "Frindle?" Janet looked at her pen and looked at him like he was nuts. She wrinkled her nose and said, "What's a Frindle?" Nick grinned and said, "You'll find out. See you later." It was there at the corner of Spring Street and South Grand Avenue, 1 block from home, on the September afternoon, when Nick got a big idea. We have a wonderful picture of him showing the Frindle, the big idea. And by the time he had run down the street and up the steps to the door and upstairs to his room, it wasn't just a big idea. It was a plan, a whole plan, just begging for Nick to put into action. And action was Nick's middle name. The next day after school, the plan began. Nick walked into Penny Pantry store and asked the lady behind the counter for a Frindle. She squinted at him. "A what?" "A Frindle, please, a black one." Nick smiled at her. She leaned over closer, aimed one ear at him. "You want what?" "A Frindle." And this time Nick pointed at the ballpoint pens behind her on the shelf. "A black one, please." The lady handed Nick the pen. He handed her the 49 cents and said thank you and left the store. 6 days later, Janet stood at the counter of the penny pantry. Same store, same lady. John had come in the day before, and Pete the day before that, and Chris the day before that, and Dave the day before that. Janet was the fifth kid that Nick had sent there to ask the woman for a Frindle. And when she asked, the lady reached back for the pens and said, "Blue or black?" Nick was standing 1 aisle away at the candy racks, and he was grinning. Frindle was a real word. It meant pen. Who says Frindle means pen? You do, Nicholas. Half an hour later, a group of serious fifth graders had a meeting in Nick's playroom. It was John, Pete, Dave, Chris, and Janet. Add Nick, and that's 6 kids, 6 secret agents. They held up their right hands and read the oath Nick had written out. From this day on and forever, I will never use the word pen again. Instead, I will use the word Frindle, and I will do everything possible so others will too. And all 6 of them signed the oath, which, with Nick's Frindle, the plan would work. Thanks, Miss Granger. Hey, boys and girls, this is Miss Goad here. I wanted to go ahead and continue Chapter 7 of Frindle by Andrew Clements. Word Wars. School was the perfect place to launch the new word. And since this was a major historical event, Nick wanted it to begin in exactly the right class, 7th period language arts. Nick raised his hand first thing after the bell rang and said, Miss Granger, I forgot my Frindle. Sitting 3 rows away, John blurted out, I have an extra one you can borrow, Nick. And then John made a big show of looking for something in his backpack. I think I have an extra Frindle. I told my mom to get me 3 or 4. I'm sure I have an extra Frindle in here yesterday, but I must have taken it. Oh, wait. Oh, yeah, here it is. And then John made a big show of throwing it over to Nick, and Nick missed it on purpose, and they made his big show of finding it. Miss Granger and every kid in the class got the message loud and clear. The black plastic thing that Nick borrowed from John had a funny name, a different name, a new name, Frindle. There was a lot of giggling, but Mrs. Granger turned up the power of her eyes and swept the room into silence. And the rest of the class went by according to plan, her plan. As everyone was leaving after class, Mrs. Granger said, Nicholas, I'd like to have a word with you. She emphasized the word word. Nick's mouth felt dry, and he gulped, but his mind stayed clear. He walked up to her desk. Yes, Miss Granger? It's a funny idea, Nicholas, but I will not have my class disrupted again. Is that clear? Eyes were lit up, but it was mostly light, not much heat. Idea? What idea? Nick asked Nick, and he tried to make his eyes blank as possible. You know what I mean, Nicholas. I am talking about the performance that you and John gave at the start of class. I am talking about this. She held up her pen, an old maroon fountain pen with a blue cap. But I really didn't have a Frindle with me, said Nick, amazed at his own bravery. And hidden behind his glasses, Nick kept his eyes wide and blank. Mrs. Granger's eyes flashed and then narrowed, and her lips formed a thin, hard line. She was quiet for a few seconds, and then she said, I see. Very well. Then I guess we have nothing more to discuss today, Nicholas. You may go. Thanks, Miss Granger, said Nick, and he grabbed his backpack and headed for the door. And when he was just stepping into the hallway, he said, and I promise I won't forget my Frindle again. Bye. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you back tomorrow.